Hello, students. Welcome. This is Mr. Kitts. So today is pretty much the end of our new notes. So believe it or not, this is the end of the year. We obviously still have other stuff that we're going to be doing, but as far as the new content, this pretty much is it. And today we're going to be kind of closing the book on people and events that have impacted the world toward the end of the 20th century and essentially some of the modern times. So back in 2012, we learned about a young girl named Malala. And Malala was fighting for women's rights, specifically Islamic women's rights. Now, in Pakistan, schools were not really meant for women. Malala had been speaking out against the education system in Pakistan at this time, and she became a target. In 2012, she was shot in the face. I believe she was shot once in the face. I think she was shot 3 times in total. She survived it, very fortunately for her, but not after many surgeries and various other things. And this was a look, and this is a look at Islamic fundamentalism. In the United States, if a woman was, speaking out and fighting for her rights, we would look at it as a brave thing and the right thing to do. In Pakistan, they saw it as something that needed to be silenced. And that's kind of a big part of Islamic fundamentalism. They are Islamic, but they follow a much stricter interpretation, and they're responsible for many, many of the terror attacks that we see. So when we talk about groups like ISIS or the Taliban or Al Qaeda, Iran, these are all types of Islamic fundamentalists. They're a lot more extreme. They perform acts that are terror attacks in many ways. They believe in jihad, which is like a holy war. So these are groups that you do not really want to be on the wrong side of. Unfortunately for Malala, she was, and it did cost her. Now, she is a symbol of the women's rights movement, specifically for Muslim women today, and she's an incredibly strong young woman, but she definitely had to suffer to get there. All right, so changing gears a little bit. What would you say if we asked you, who's the most powerful country in the world? Most people would probably answer America. Now, if we said, who's the second most powerful country in the world? A lot of people would probably point to China. And these two countries have a very complicated relationship, right? So, when you talk about like, what's your relationship status, right, on social media, there's the option of it's complicated. Well, the relationship between the US and China would definitely be it's complicated. Because you have the US, which is democratic, we're capitalist, we live by these fundamentals of freedom and things of that nature. And then you have China, who's communist, but is also kind of capitalist. They allow people to make money. There's more millionaires and billionaires made in China each year than here in the US. And, a lot of our production takes place in the US. In fact, if you look at most of the products that you have, if you pick up a product that's near you, flip it over, more than likely, most of the stuff you'll find will be made either in China or Taiwan, or somewhere around there. A lot of production does not take place here in the US domestically. And that's kind of shifted some of the power between the US and China. Now, as we said, China does not offer the same freedoms that we offer here in the United States. Are you allowed to criticize your government here in the US? Yeah, sure. If you don't like what our current president was doing, or our former president, or a senator, or a congressman, or whatever, any public figure, you are allowed to criticize that public figure. If you want to start a podcast that bashes a president or a congressman or something like that, you're allowed to do that. However, in China, not so much. Okay, there's a lot more criticism and there's a lot more control in China. They do not want the people criticizing the government. Okay, here's a good one, right? You can't go on certain sites in China. You can't go on like certain sites like Twitter or Facebook, stuff like that. If they do have internet, it's very censored as to what you can see. So if you were to type in something about Tiananmen Square in China, you would not see anything about the Tiananmen Square massacre. You would just see tourist applications for Tiananmen Square. And speaking of the Tiananmen Square massacre, let's talk about it. What was the Tiananmen Square incident in China? So this happened in 1989, and you might have seen this picture before. This guy right here, we refer to him as Tank Man. They actually don't know his name. And we are going to show you that video. We have that for you, so you'll watch that video after you're done with the notes here. Essentially, Tiananmen Square was a protest that young students, 19, 20, 21 years old, formed a protest against the government, against the Chinese government. And those students wanted more democratic rights. They wanted to vote, they wanted to be heard, things of that nature. The government obviously did not want that to happen. So the government used its military. They used tanks, they used soldiers, and they went in and they killed a lot of people. Now, we don't know the number because China did not release that number. So we don't know all of the numbers. However, the press, now remember, this is 1989, so there's a lot more, there's the internet is starting to become a thing. There's, phones technology is advancing. Things are a lot more, sort of interconnected at this time period. So the press was there and saw everything that was going on. Okay, so this showed that China was going to allow for some capitalism, but did not want to give up individual rights at that time. All right, so the other day we talked about the Middle East, and we talked about Iraq specifically. So let's bring up the leader of Iraq at that time period. His name was Saddam Hussein. I believe we kind of went over him a little bit, but he was the vicious dictator of Iraq from 1979 to 2003. We had an issue with Saddam Hussein in 1990, and it was called the Persian Gulf War. So what happened was Iraq invaded the country that was right near it called Kuwait. And Kuwait is a small nation that has a lot of oil. And the U.S. basically didn't want, we're allied with Kuwait because we got a lot of oil from them. And we didn't want Iraq going in and taking that oil that we were using. So we declared war against them. We actually had the United Nations, the U.S. and its allies, and the United Nations was a part of this. We removed Iraq from Kuwait. However, we left Saddam Hussein in charge of Iraq. That would change. When we talked about that, we talked about post 9/11. That would change in 2003 after the U.S. goes into Iraq. We captured Saddam Hussein and had him executed. Now, when we talk about kind of the quote bad guys today, I think most of us would think of the country that has the most sort of hatred towards the United States today. We'd probably be talking about North Korea. Okay, and what are the issues concerning North Korea? Well, it's an isolated communist state. And one of the biggest things that North Korea has is nukes, okay? It has nuclear weapons. It also has the backing of China, which makes it incredibly difficult to try to have any sort of a war with North Korea. Because not only are you dealing with nuclear capabilities and nuclear proliferation, but you're also dealing with China. Okay, so the problems with North Korea have been going on for a very, very long time. It's not just Trump or Obama before him. They go way back. All right. As I mentioned in a prior video talking about the Cold War, we kind of said this goes all the way back to the Korean War in the 1950s, where there was never ever a peace treaty. And essentially, the U.S. and North Korea remain in a quote a state of war, even though we're really not at war. But because they have this leader, Kim Jong Un, and because he's not the most sane of characters, um, he does try to make threats. This will cause alarm, and essentially it leads to problems. Will there continue to be problems between the U.S. and Korea through North Korea throughout your lifetime? More than likely. Maybe your kids, maybe your grandkids. I don't know. Don't have a crystal ball. But I can tell you that as far as some of the hot spots in the world today, North Korea is definitely one of them. One other guy just to look at, his name is Slobodan Milosevic, and he was a Serbian dictator who also committed genocide. We're just kind of, he'd say we're kind of just throwing this in. We are talking about the deaths of over 100,000 people with Slobodan, real nasty dictator of Serbia. Now Serbia is in Eastern Europe. So they're the Slavic nations over there. And we are going to show you, there's a video clip that just kind of goes over this, but we did just want to bring up his name. The last sort of vocab word, and like I said, it's a little choppy when we do this because we're kind of just doing topic by topic here. The last sort of vocab word that we wanted to just go over, and this is one that has sort of grown in capacity over the years, is called globalization. And essentially, this is the interdependence of world's economies. In other words, countries like the United States and China and North Korea and gosh, you name it, France, England, Brazil, so on and so forth. All of these nations are connected. And because their economies are connected, it's sort of made things more, and cultures more sort of blended, right? You go to China, you see McDonald's, you see Kentucky Fried Chicken, you see all these things. It's almost like the modern day cultural diffusion, which, you learned a lot about cultural diffusion back in Global 9. This is kind of like the modern day terminology of cultural diffusion. That is globalization. It's kind of the blending of world economies and cultures and populations, really, too. We talked about in a lesson a couple days ago, we talked about technology sort of making the world smaller. Well, when you make the world smaller, you kind of make things more connected, and that's sort of what globalization is. Um, all right, so that's it for this lesson. That's it for most of the new notes. Like I said, we may do some videos. Do you have a World Leaders project that you're going to be working on? So we may do something just going over some of those world leaders. And odds are when we get to review, we'll give you guys a couple of videos just based on the reviews. But basically, this was the new notes. So we hope you guys enjoyed these lectures. We hope that you enjoyed the school year. We know that this was a little bit bumpy, very odd. I know for myself, I know for Mr. Boyce, I know this is, and even for my other kids, for me and Miss B, this is not really how we wanted to do this or have to bring these lessons to you, but we hope you enjoyed them. So basically, if you guys have any questions or if you need any help with anything, just email us. Otherwise, this is Mr. Kitts signing off.